talking tonight, but I wanted to say a few words of thanking the White Bear Art Center for inviting me to do this. I have very, very fond memories of the project I worked on called The Culture of Pots, which was in 2017. And I wanted to say one thing to you, Kyle, and to the Art Center. I think art is amazing when it evokes an experience. And when I came in, I started picking up the pot. So that's how much I felt like I was at the St. Croix Pottery tour. I'm like, whoops, I'm sorry, I'm a curator, I'm not supposed to do that. But I had this moment, I felt like it felt very much like the spirit of it. And it's a great show. I got to go in early by myself, and it was really, I didn't mean to pick up the pots, but I did start picking them up. So anyway, so I apologize for that, but it was I just want to say, it feels so much being in the room with all of you and so many people here that I've known for now over 20 years, who are great potters, important people, and well, I guess what I want to say, is that the title of the Culture of Pots, which when you asked if we could use that for this, I appreciated it because in this book, Pamela Esplanade mentions in her first paragraph about it that, you know, what the tour did was it honed and helped develop a sense of pottery in the upper Midwest. And she says, dash, dash, a culture of pots. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. What does she mean by that? That seems like a flourish, but it also seems like a whole lot more. And getting these questions from you and the board members, I want to get into the whole lot more tonight, if people don't mind, with the questions. And I want to be honest and upfront and tell people that I was given questions that came from board members and the artists and others, and some of them mocked or not mocked, or very much like my questions, but I want to put them in an order tonight for us to be able to build on what it really is, what it means. It's not just making pottery is a lot of a mouthful, but get to the point, what is the community? What is it like? How have they changed the way pottery is and how they work together? So I could talk for an hour, as Kinji knows, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually ask the questions. I'm not the professor here, but I have some questions that I want to ask. But before we get to that, I want to have each of the potters who is sitting here introduce themselves, so that I don't mess it up, and I want to have Jeff go last because Jeff has something he wants to say. So or you can do it first if you want to. Jeff, you've got it. Why don't you go ahead? Never mind, my plan. Go ahead. You have things to say.
All right. Is this working?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I, at the last minute, decided to be on the panel. I didn't want to be on it because I retired my teaching hat last year. I just didn't want to be in front of people. It makes me anxious now. And I just thought, no, I just want to be quiet, work in my studio and all that. But I have to acknowledge some people. Going back in history, I have to acknowledge Carol Sedison Ross, who started the American Crafts Council. She, in 1973, produced the first craft fair at Rhinebeck. Then from then on, they began to have other American craft festivals throughout the country, and it just began to blossom. I also want to thank Carol Savion, who's a friend of mine, who is the executive director of Craft in America, who's done all the series Crafts in America for public TV. She's now working on a huge project. Next year will be honoring the 250 years of crafts in America. There'll be 100 exhibitions and lectures. The last event will be an exhibition at the Smithsonian. From there, she's driving to Minnesota, and she's going to take a tour. She's been a huge influence in crafts in America. And also, we have to thank Warren McKenzie, who began having lawn sales in the early 50s with his first wife, Alex. And so that was an important seed there. And when I came back from England, I moved back to my parents on White Bear Lake, where I had a studio in a kiln, and Randy Johnson wanted to make pots, so he brought in his wood. We made pots for the summer, and then we decided to have a sale a la Warren, so we asked Warren for his mailing list. And he said, sure. It was in a metal index things, handwritten, so we wrote them all out and sent them out, and lots of people showed up. We made $700. This is in 71. We thought, oh, we have it made as potters. It's wonderful. And then the next sale was on my own. It snowed the night before, so all the tables I set up outside were snowing. I thought, what the pots are beautiful, and then to put all the pots. but then they all froze to the table. People could get and it was all downhill from there. But my first pot was made. Is Frank Zeller here by any chance? He was my art teacher in high school, right across over that way, about 3 blocks, the 3 round schools. I was the first graduating class. And Frank was my high school art teacher along with Teddy Workways. So Frank said, okay, now we're having a segment on pottery, and he took off his coat, and there was an Amico tabletop wheel, and each person had like 20 minutes on. So I started to, and it was a mess. And we had to make a hand-built piece. So I went to my parents' liquor cabinet and took out a cream de mint bottle. It was shaped like this, the illusory base, just like that. And I somehow managed to make a mold of it. And so I brought it back, and Frank said, here are the glazes, they're little jars of Amico glaze. Just take a brush and put on 1 coat, maybe 2 at the most. So I chose alligator gold because it was avocado, my mom's favorite color, with gold stripes. So I put on a layer, another, and I just kept layering it. Gold, and it came out of the Alpine kiln stuck to the shelf. I couldn't find that in my parents' basement when we cleaned out the house. So that was my beginning. I moved up to Taylor's Falls area in '74, and I began to have yard sales with other artist friends from high school. And then it just began to grow into what it is now. So anyway, I won't say another word tonight.
So this is Jeff Ostrich, and why don't we just introduce, people mostly know you in here, but I still think you should all say your names, and then I'll have a question.
I'm Linda Christensen. I'm Alana Guayet.
I'm Peter Jadanath.
Hard to hear you.
I'm Matt Krause.
Okay.
I'm Ani Kasten.
Janelle Jacobson. You're gonna hold that one because you guys can share it. You all can share, but I'm gonna dive into the middle of these questions. First, to ask, I'm wondering, those of you who've all been part of obviously the Pottery Tour and the St. Croix Pottery group or community, how has that experience, the Pottery Tour and your relationship to one another, how has it actually changed? How has it actually shaped your practice? Not changed. How has it shaped your practice as a potter to be? I'm not even using the right word. I'm not sure. We always talk about the tour, but you have this bond that spreads miles apart. And I'm just wondering how that affects your practice as potters, I guess. That's what I mean. But I mean, there's other ways to think of it. So
it's an enormous challenge to try and answer that succinctly.
I know. It was an enormous challenge to ask it succinctly. Sorry.
Briefly, Jack moved up in '74, I moved up in '75, and Linda
77 or 76?
yeah, so the 3 of us started working together to make an awareness of pots up in our area. We had a little brochure that we put out. And as the years went by, I met Will Swanson, married, and Bob Briscoe moved up during that time, and he and Bob got together and brainstormed about having the St. Croix Valley Pottery Tour. And then in 1991, I believe we had our first event, and the group of 7 got, not all of us are original on that group. And started planning, and one of the prominent things that we did together was to reach a consensus. If too many people objected to an idea that we had, then we wouldn't deal with that. We wouldn't do that. We'd move forward and always make our decisions as a group and agree to it, even though one might have a little disagreement, but saw value in it. So over the years, we've added aspects to what we've done to make this happen. But in the process of reaching consensus, we learn about each other, and we choose to work together towards a common goal. And the rewards come when everyone in the audience audience comes and supports the enormous number of pots and potters that we have. And it's kind of a symbiotic relationship that has developed this culture in the St. Croix River Valley among the host potters and all our guest potters and all of you who come and help us out. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Other thoughts down the line?
I would just say there's a lot of idea sharing, and it can be things that aren't so much studio, not clay. It's like, hey, Peter, what do you do with all the cars? Where do you get because half of what we do is, in a good way, crowd management. And so there's just a lot of idea sharing amongst all of us. And that does go into the work too. It's like you see something someone else is doing, and you're like, wow, that's really interesting, like what's going on there. And so for me, it's kind of like you leave college and you get a little lost, and now we have a cohort again to kind of run ideas off of. So that's kind of the dialogue I see.
I think, the pottery tour is also just a tremendous source of income for artists, and I find, for me personally, that my production workflow, the balance between producing work and then also taking risks and being more creative with my work is sort of shaped by where I am in the year. And am I leading up towards the pottery tour when it's a good thing to have a large number of pots that I know how to make, versus is it time to take some risks and throw everything away and not be productive? And I think other people have talked about that as well. I've heard people talk about that as well.
I guess I was thinking about how, as potters, we work from the backs of thousands of years of potters, and some of the original hosts have passed away. 2 of our hosts have passed away. Another has decided to not be a host anymore. But this idea of consensus, I think, is so important, and as some of us get older and older, I guess we're all getting older and older, everybody in this room is getting older and older, but as we get older in our careers, it's wonderful to have the younger potters as hosts in our area. I mean, it's just really incredible to feel the longevity over thousands of years. I mean, it's really something.
You weren't gonna
Maybe. I've been thinking a lot lately, and it happened during the pandemic when I was just sitting on the couch a lot. And I grew up in a large family in White Bear Lake, and I have one brother just died last year, and my another brother's in the hospital on his last bit of life, and the family's kind of crumbled and disorganized now. And I don't have a family. I did not have children. I'm the only one here who has not had children.
You're in good company.
And so I recognize, I do now, it's more important that what the church provides me is a sense of community. They're like a family to me. And that's a recent observation. Aside from it's a source of income, I deal with very few galleries now, so it's important that I have this income, and also the bringing together of my friends and people, and also the guests I invite some from overseas. I'm trying to create an international community too, so I love having people come over from wherever. And my thrill is, I'm trying to rotate more people in as I kind of wind down from this, is how there'll be a new potter saying, look at down, there's cars a quarter mile down the road. Can you believe this? It's a phenomenon. And I want them to get the same high I get from this, the interest and love of pots in this region.
Nice, well, great. This is my follow-up question, or the next question is a little more pragmatic. It's related, but a little more pragmatic. How is it, how do you find and connect and choose your guest artists? I mean, that is actually interesting to people. How does that work?
Well, I'm new to the tour. This is my third year, so it was undertaking that idea of inviting people was challenging because I wanted to invite people that had an aesthetic of their work and a commitment to what they were doing and could be depended upon, but also I have 3 young kids, and my dear wife Emily is very forgiving and accepting of the pottery tour. So you're bringing someone into your home that becomes part of your family for weekends, so you want to bring in the right energy. So part of my decision was finding the people who had the work I liked, the person, even if I didn't know them, if somebody else knew them and could say, yeah, that person's a good person. They're supportive and committed to helping you out and patient. And then as far as how the future goes, as far as new people coming and going, that's challenging because you fall in love with these people and become a family, and so then my kids get to know them, they get to know their kids, and next thing you know, everybody's bringing their families to the tour. So it's hard to part ways, even though you're trying to grow an idea and spread the wealth, I guess, of the experience to people, but that's a challenge, for sure.
Thanks for saying that, because I think that's a really complicated thing about collaborating and being in a community. And so I want to hear more, but it's interesting, really interesting answer for me to hear, because I think, like that is having a family and keeping a family and doing work together. that becomes very complicated. So I appreciate what you said. Thanks for saying it. I'm sure everybody has. I'm sure you have more. I want to hear everybody else's answers, though. I want to hear what else your thoughts are.
Building on what Peter talked about, I think it's actually a very difficult task to find the right people to be part of the tour. And I'm also newer to the tour. I started a few years before Peter in 2018, and I took over from Connie Marin, who was my host when she invited me to the tour in 2012. So when I came onto the tour, I inherited quite a few guests from Connie, and as Peter mentioned, there is on some of the stops a sort of way of doing things where someone will be part of the tour. I have a few people at my place who've been doing the tour for more than 20 years, and some of them I just fell in love with them and their work, and I have kept them on a few years that I've taken over from Connie. But I've also had a few guests who had health problems or were retiring, and so I've had new spots open up. And the tour is a really huge commitment for somebody. It's a lot of work. It's a big time commitment. It's potentially a tremendous travel commitment. They have to have a vehicle that can transport themselves and all their work. If they have another job aside from making pottery, that's difficult to make the trip. And so you have to find somebody who can produce the work, whose work is professional and competent to kind of sustain such a major, selling event. And I also have been very interested in just a diverse array of work. My stop is a little more, I would say, sculptural and just deviating a little bit from traditional Minnesota folk pottery. And so I'm always looking for work that is a little challenging to the notion of what studio pottery is or can be. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into
telling us. I was wondering about that.
I'm mentioning that. It doesn't work for everybody to come all the way out to Minnesota and spend a week selling, up to, I don't know, some people sell 500 pots in a weekend, which that's a lot. So, I see the email.
Interesting. I wasn't gonna do this tonight, but I'm gonna jump to another thing, because it's something I was gonna get to later, but since people are identifying themselves, and we have people that are like the originals, as you were saying, then people saying, I'm just new to this, and this is a different time, and so I'm curious about the relationship between, how that spans amongst you. You're making these decisions together, and it might not be anything about the time that you come up in, like the 70s, and just that, we have little kids who didn't, but I just wonder how that works. But do you have some thoughts about that? Obviously everybody likes each other, but the generations are different, it sounds like, a little bit, am I right? No? You're like, I don't know. Just, or were you like that at the beginning, thinking, we can't invite these people because they're in our house, it's a little bit different, right? I can't, but it's hard. Was it hard choosing at the beginning who you bring to the tour? Did you have trouble? Did you have trouble with that? When you were starting out and saying, we're gonna invite these people and all that, it's a little bit different, right? Because it was, not the 70s, I'm not gonna say that, but there was a certain sense, I see there's a different feeling, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe I'm just romanticizing. You weren't also like, oh my God, we have to get people, what's that gonna be like? And maybe it was. That's what I'm wondering about,
Yeah, I guess I felt very private about where I lived, just very, very private. And the idea of having really thousands of people come to your house in a weekend, I guess we didn't really think it would be thousands of people. I was surprised that people actually would come. But I think the first tour, we had pots in our house and on the porch, and you could just come on right in the house. The front porch to the back porch. And then eventually we decided to invite a guest or two, and that seemed like, that was a little bit easier that, somebody else would be there with you. But I think the privacy was the thing that I really struggled with. And when we had a child, I was very concerned about that. I just didn't want her, I don't know, I guess because she's adopted, we had some issues of anonymity that we were dealing with. So, the whole privacy thing, obviously I came to terms with it, but that was a really big change for me. The other thing is, I do other things in my work besides making work to sell. I basically don't make work to sell, but I do sell my work. So I had other commitments, traveling, teaching, some residencies, and the idea of just making pots for a big sale has never, ever appealed to me. So my thinking comes more from privacy and what do I want to make, and I do want to be with these wonderful potters and with all of you wonderful people. I do want that and need that, but it hasn't been easy, I would say.
Okay, so thanks for saying that too, because it's not a generational thing. I see that it could be difficult for anyone to do that. I'm not gonna say what I always feel like, whoa, that's a lot it must be months and months of the year that you're thinking about this, right? So it's a big part of your life that way. Yeah.
Yes, basically the whole year.
Yeah.
At least I'm thinking about it, worrying about it, how am I going to feed the people, how is the road can be okay, those kind of issues. But I think that I'm talking about Linda and Janelle and I moved up about the same time, and we were part of the Back to the Earth movement, and we chose the area because land was expensive back then. And it was, I guess, close to the river, that, and we wanted a certain way of life. We wanted to be potters, and my idea came from Warren McKenzie, although we taught. It came from my experience in England, meeting Cardo and all those, and that making pots could be a way of life. And that's what attracted me to it. It was this quiet, private life, which turned out different than that. It's just being able to grow your own food and heat the house with wood, and all of that was part of the whole picture. We were making a political statement back to the earth, and just so happened that Janelle and I became good friends, and we talked every Tuesday night. Every Tuesday night we talked. But then she got married, had a child, and we didn't talk. But now we talk a lot. She started living in the apartment above my pottery for a couple of months. So I started redoing their house. But we don't. I think it's a misconception that we all hang out together. We really don't. We have our own lives. We don't tend to hang out that much. We have our meetings and put this all together, and I think we have the same values.
So you're talking about the generational sort of difference in question, and I had kind of a unique life experience. My childhood was spent running around at pottery sales because my dad, Guillermo, is one of our hosts, and I co-host with him, and he started doing it, I think in, 2009 was his first year, or was it his first year as a guest with you? Okay, it was a while ago. But for me, I think having pottery sales was what was visible when it came to pottery. I mean, my dad was off in his studio working every day, but I was at school. I wasn't really seeing that part of the process. But for me, what was visible was these big, exciting events where all of his friends would come out, and it'd be fun. There'd be food, there'd be music, there'd be like people coming to our house. We lived in Venezuela for many years. That's where I grew up, and that's where my dad had pottery sales. He also was really sort of inspired by, like you were saying, Warren McKenzie's model of having these home sales. So to me, having a pottery sale and sort of structuring the workflow around that seemed like the most natural thing in the world, and it's informed the way that I approach how I make my work. And it feels just like a tremendous privilege and responsibility for me. That's how I've stepped into my role as a host, initially quite reluctantly, because it's an honor and it's amazing. I feel like it's kind of wild to be sitting up here next to these people. You guys are really impressive and amazing. So that's a big part of it for me, is that there's decades of this incredible hard work that these original hosts have done, that I know my dad has done to cultivate the culture of pots that we're talking about. So I feel sort of as though I'm a steward of it, you know. Yeah,
That's nice,
That's
yeah.
the feeling that I have.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'll be brief, but I echo everything you just said. I started going to the tour in 95, 96 time frame. I went to Bemidji State University, and Butch Holden was my professor there, and he always would say, "You have to go to the tour, skip school, go do that." And I didn't pursue a higher education beyond a bachelor's degree, but attending the tour was my higher education, because I went and I picked up every pot and I looked at them upside down. It's like, how did they make that? And then after I left, I had a friend who was apprenticing with Bob Briscoe, and so I became kind of attached to Bob, and he was very attentive and thoughtful and giving with information and ideas. And then I just started, it's like, well, that's how you do it, then I'll do that. And now I'm here, and now my kids are running around in pottery tours, and I always think like, oh, one day they're gonna get old, what are they gonna think about that? How are they gonna remember these times? This is fun.
decided to invite him to be our guest on the tour, and so he got a real taste of what it was all about for about 5 years, I think, and then he decided to take the lead and be a host, and he's done very well with that, and I'm proud of him for that. And as with Bonnie, moving into Connie's sphere of being a host and being a co-host with him for a while, it worked well. Will and I had a 1-year-old on the first year of the tour, or a 2-year, what? I can't remember. Anyway, he was born in 1991, and maybe he was a 2-year-old. And so we had somebody to take care of him, but in that period of time, we didn't have any guest stars, so it was not such a big deal. It was like an open house, and many of us had like an open house, and then over time, we each invited more guests, and everybody thought, oh, this is pretty good, and we decided to cap it at 8 guests, I think. And so 8 or 9 guests and the host choirs. So that is a limit, but there are so many more potters that we would like to invite. It gets, you reach a limit with how many you can host, but there always seems like, golly, I wish there was room for one more, instead of having to just invite someone. But the, anyway, having the opportunity to be able to not travel to a show to sell your work, to be able to sell it from your home is delightful. It's a huge challenge to be able to sell your work and also host the tour, because you've got so much planning ahead of time. For Will and I, over the past 33 years of doing the tour, we have had an awful lot of organizational time spent in all the months prior to the tour and then wrapping up after the tour. And I've just finished my task of sending out mailing list corrections to everybody. Linda and Jeff are gonna start up pretty soon with sending out guest letters to new invitees or the returning whatever. So there's a constant flow of action on one or the other participants' parts to keep it all going. It's all about stuff.
Yeah. Actually, these are all really not surprising, but obviously not exactly what I thought you were going to say. But it's very interesting to me. It's really interesting to me what you're saying, and I have always thought, and it's just gelled for me. When I first went to the Pottery tour, I thought this is like our International Art Fair for craft, because you have so many people. So when you go up, you're like, oh, these guys that you invited. Oh, I'm getting to meet those artists. But it's better than the International Art Fair, because it's a much more hands-on experience. Do you know what I mean? It's like going to Miami, but better. Do you know, better because you are really you're in a culture that's happening there. It's not just going to booths and buying it. Not that anybody says you shouldn't sell your art, but we shouldn't sell it. But there's something so real about it. I think that you're like, we're from here, we're the guests, and so it's a really amazing model that you set up. I commend you. That's what I say. Yeah.
We require the artists to be present.
Right. Yeah.
And we do what we can to let the artist be present. I can't be present with my pots, which I regret, because I'm making sure everything's going
You're the host, yeah.
And it's quiet.
Yeah.
But it really makes a difference that people get to talk with all the guest players.
I think it's really unique. I think. I haven't done my research, but I think it is really unique that way, that it has this international, it really is, an art fair is not a great term, it's not the greatest thing, but it's a really something that's very unique that you share with people. It's not just, like the surrealists hanging out together playing games. You're really sharing with one another and inviting people in to get a feel. So I'm not going to waste your time talking, but to sing the praises of it, it's really unique. We should do a catalog on it sometime. I mean, there's a, you know, like, I mean, there's something historical. I mean, here we did do this, and I think it was great, but there is a story about this, about the pottery tour that makes it different than Haystack, different than Scouting, and it's different. And there's something very, I don't know whether you say it's Minnesota, but it has developed. It is what it is because it was made that way. And so when I think about these generations here, it is a long. Now here's my pragmatic question. To follow up with that is, how was I was going to say this. How would you help younger emerging potters? How do you do that? What is that practice of that, trying to bring emerging potters in? If they asked, what would you tell them? Like, how do we get into this? What would we do?
It gets to be really uncomfortable in a way because but sometimes things succeed. One potter sent packets to I don't know how many of us, and he did get a spot at Jeff's for a year or more, and then we invited that person when Jeff wanted to rotate, and we eventually rotated him out. But we get lots of phone calls or requests, but to try and encourage young people to prepare themselves, they have to be, like you expressed, they have to be able to make quality pots in a large number to meet the appetite of the audience. But according to the different personalities of the host sites, that also has to blend in, and their personalities have to blend in. So it's really tricky. Will pointed out in our discussion this morning after reading the questions that one really helpful thing is to have anybody that's interested in future participation volunteer, see what really goes on behind the scenes to understand how important it is to have this whole machinery. Like, we have X number of potters, but I had 224 volunteers to work in the various aspects behind the scenes to make it comfortable for all the potters and the host guests. So volunteer, and we have just invited our first person who has volunteered for 5 to 8 years, and his work has gone from being an apprentice with one of our host potters to making his own unique work and organizing a tour in the state that he's living in. So, for us, they actually have to prove themselves before we can invite them. I mean, before we feel comfortable.
I feel like that question really personally relates to me because I was a young person kind of starting out in my career, and Connie called me up out of the blue and offered me this opportunity. So, and coming to the Pottery Tour changed my life. Obviously, I ended up moving here and taking over for Connie. And when I was a guest of Connie before moving here, Mark Ferris was a long time guest potter at Connie's, and he had one of the years that I was there, his assistant was Candace Blunt, who I've stayed in touch with over the years, and her work has just developed, and just, I mean, she's amazing. So 2 years ago, I invited her to come as a guest, and Mark retired. So Candace sort of carried on a little bit of Mark's legacy, being a guest at my stop. And we do have all of these wonderful assistants who are interested in pottery and come from all different, some of them come from colleges or universities that are far away, and they travel and camp in Minnesota to be a part of the tour. And there are some local community ceramic studios in the Twin Cities that we had a couple of assistants from there this year. And I am very interested in bringing in people, younger people from hoping, I have a few people in mind already that have worked as assistants that I think that their work is getting really good and they'd be a great fit in a few years to be a guest potter. So.
That's great, thanks. And then just thinking, when we did this book, the two of you were new, I think. So I'm thinking, that's I was kind of looking, but I'm also wondering if this. So you were going to say something about this too. How do you encourage? What's your thought about it?
Well, I was gonna say the same thing that both Janelle and Ani have said, because I am literally the product of the on-the-job training at Bob Briscoe's house. So I was just a punk kid, a couple years out of college, and ended up volunteering to help at Bob's, and it was just a really good time, shenanigans. But, you know, you learn, okay, we need a mailing list, we gotta do this. Like, how do we build a mailing list, Bob? Tell me about it. And so that's what I suggest too, because a lot of young people do reach out to all of us and just tell them, well, come up, and we try to reserve a lot of our assistant spots for those types of individuals, and we house them and pay them so that it's, you know, because a lot of times they're taking work off, things like that. And so not just using their labor, but, you know, come work and learn. Yeah. So it's like, that's how you start, basically.
Great. I'm looking around. And that was a question that was here. I thought it is an important question to say, you know, how do you get in? And that makes sense. It's an apprentice or come up and find out what's going on. Great. I want to open up questions to the audience, but there is this one big question at the bottom here of the list that I have. And I'm going to just read it to you because it was suggested by one of the potters. And I'm going to read to you because I think that's the best way for me not to translate. She says, one unique thing about the tour is the history of philanthropy. While this is not publicized, the Potters have far-reaching connections with museum collections, schools, relief agencies, and more. With this in mind, how do we change culture? How does the St. Croix Pottery Group, St. Croix Pottery Tour, what you build, change culture? I'll just see what you have to say. Yeah.
Well, I actually wrote that. I'm actually really interested in that right now. When I look at the political scene right now, I think, yeah, we can change laws, but how do we really change culture? And culture often precedes legislation. Sometimes it lags behind, and we're not legislating anything, thankfully. But I'm just really curious about that. I have quite a few thoughts about it, but I guess I want to hear what other people think about it, or the audience. Maybe someone in the audience has some thoughts about that. But I would preface that we really, through consensus, we really feel a need to help people have access to making pots, being educated about pots, being exposed to pots. Purchasing pots is great, but that's really not really what we're about. Even though we do sell our pots, it's really not the driving thing. We have a love of pots, and we feel lucky and privileged that we can make pots, and we want to help other people be able to do that. So, any thoughts? Anybody? Julie?
I have a thought, and it's a different culture, and this is not my original thought, but I have heard it said of the St. Croix Pottery Tour that a group of individuals decided not to compete, but to work together for their own betterment. And that is a living example of how you all have done the same thing. You're still your individual potters and your work, but your underlying concept is we will work together.
Did everybody hear that back there? Oh, yeah. Do you have something to say, Kenji?
Thank you. Yeah, just one thing. I was born in Japan, and I have a Japanese last name. Everybody knows that. And I have so many of you guys' pots in my house. And this is the, again, Warren McKenzie has, I don't know how many of you know Warren, but so many of you know, right? And Warren's, one story I have to tell you before anything. Warren had a little sales gallery when he was in Stillwater. He passed away, and so many of us loved him. But most important thing I remember is that he had his sales gallery, little shelf, okay? Velvet, special. It's all that. Yeah, otherwise, it's just regular, showing the space. And he had a little pots, and it's only like $2, $5 on that shelf, and there may be about 20 pots at the most. And what the hell are you doing, Warren? He said, no, these are for kids. I'm not making any money. Money isn't the thing. But when you're a child, when you get the touch and the feeling, now I'm making a future artists, future creative guys. So he had a one special, that's very, very special to me. I thought that he is one, not just making parts, but producing future generations. That is a cultivation idea, yes, you guys told me. And also Yanagi is the philosopher who supported Warren and Hamada, all these Japanese wonderful national treasure group. Okay, what Yanagi's idea was not to honor the individual in our makers. Patterns isn't that important. What they make is the community. And his goal is to create the community. Okay, you guys are doing it exactly the same. Yanagi's dream. It's true. Yeah. Yes, you're right. I know it's part of, they just make the pots. They make the communities. And they make the things we can feel, touch, smell. It's the five senses. It's not a buying and selling with money. But that is, again, mutual, there's a group of called Fluxes. And Robert Fillier says, when there's no creator or appreciator, when there's no two separation group are not there, they disappear. Who's creating and who's supporting? Okay. That's the goal of an artist. Artist is a facilitator. So you guys are not just a craftsman. You guys are philosopher. You guys are poet. You guys are community maker. I think that's one of the most important parts. Now the democracy is dying. And you guys practice indeed encourages democracy to be in everyday life, I think. Yeah. I'm so glad I'm here to affirm you guys' activity as well as, what tradition of Minge or craft, and it's no longer applied art and fine arts. It's all we are, in a sense, makers of things and the makers of community. So, anyway.
Whoa.
The tour, we do open up our life and allow people in, and people love the fact that with our work, it's a communication, us, and it goes through the pot to them, and that's to me that's important. I don't think my work would sell if I took it to a trade show and wherever, but people want this personal connection, and that's the birth of the pot, and then that my feelings go into the pot, and then you can experience that. But we do open up our life, and I think of Warren. He opened up his life to so many people at dinner gatherings and sales and this and that. He was just so good at that we just can't work in isolation.
Yeah.
And I think part of the tour that's one of its functions. But just thinking about how it spreads is that I have a side project where since I made 14 cups of all the people in my vet's office. because they've taken care of my animals for 40 years. So I made them all cups with their names on them. I did it for my dentists and my doctors and the people at the Sonic Cancer Center. They all my cups are. It's just kind of spreading something. And every so often they might show up in a sale. And really, okay, it's just some treats I throw out there.
Do you have no? Okay, I want to make sure, because we're winding down here. I appreciate what you just did, Kenji. Kenji and I used to teach at MCAT together. He always did it better. That's good. I asked a question, and he's like, "This was what you meant." Which is good. You're the teacher. But it's good. At least I sparked it. But I want to say that I want to make sure there's not. Are there any other questions there? Because I want to make sure there was enough time for questions in the audience, and I can come run this to you if you want to ask a question. Okay. Now we'll walk it to you. Okay.
Well, having been witness to the pottery tour from its beginnings, I see all of the group decision-making, the consensus, but I'd like to hear you speak to the idea of the value of each and every student, or each and every studio having their own level of decision-making and how they conduct the whole of the tour within that context of the structure you all create together.
I know for me personally, there's definitely a lot of things we all do similarly. And I think just like all the work is different, just people have different personalities, and so they have different styles in the way that they run things at their site. Some of us have huge friend groups where we can kind of strong arm people into like doing parking and things, and others might not. And so that too changes how, you know, the dynamics of how you run the site, people you hire to help, things like that. But by and large, I'd say they're all pretty similar in that it's about the audience experience first and foremost.
I also think, so during COVID, there were a lot more rules and regulations that we had to deal with hosting the pottery tour. We did not have the tour live for a couple of years. And during that time, we suddenly were having meetings of all the hosts on Zoom very frequently. And having been part of the tour host group before COVID and then during COVID, and now that the pandemic has passed by a few years, that was actually more difficult, I think, for all of us. Like it was an annoying amount of having to come to consensus about all kinds of little details, and it's a lot better with breathing space and each studio kind of a little bit more autonomous, and we have this community that is sort of intuitive among all of us at this point, and it's better that we just, you know, let each other do our thing, and we focus on doing our thing, and it all kind of works as a more cohesive group with a little more space, I think.
I feel the opposite. I felt the isolation, and I enjoyed having the space to work, but to maintain a sense of community, it was through Zoom. Otherwise, we didn't communicate very much with anybody out in the world, because we were staying in our studio, staying away from our vulnerable family members, and just being able to see everyone's faces, whether they enjoyed being there or not. It was meaningful to have us be able to connect and make some decisions. And yeah, it wasn't always easy, but it was a whole lot better than everybody just saying, let's just quit and do it all our own selves. It really helped keep our community together. So, sorry, Annie. Say just want to remind you that I'm a co-host with my husband, Bill Swanson, who has a lot of opinions that he hasn't been able to share. We were asked to have just one person per studio, and that's why Guillermo isn't there with Alana. So, there are
Come to the
9
tour
hosts and
meeting.
7 studios.
Well, is there any other burning question out there? Well then, I'll see you in May. Yes, thank you so much, all of you. Thank you.